Well, good afternoon, everybody. One of the final sessions. Hopefully we can bring a lot of energy to the discussion today to keep you going until you hit the end of the day's events. We've got a brilliant panel today with a wide range of experience from a wide range of markets. And as the title says, we're going to be looking at what are the FinTech hotspots around the world. And I think one of the themes that has come out of the last couple of days is, whereas in the past we would have been talking very much about the UK and the US, we're now seeing, and we're seeing this coming through the data, that there's a lot more range of countries and a lot more delegates here from countries around the world which are developing their FinTech ecosystem, their FinTech infrastructure, and provide great opportunities for companies to go and provide their products and services there. So without further ado, I'm going to turn to Nicola. Nicola, with TheCityUK, obviously you look at a lot of markets around the world, you have market access advisory groups. What's your perception on where the current hotspots are and how perhaps the world is changing from a FinTech perspective?
No, thank you. And I think it's absolutely fascinating to watch. And one of the things we really enjoy at the TheCityUK is the international work that we do with other markets. And we're seeing hotspots emerging in all sorts of different places around the world. You know, there's markets in Africa like Nigeria that have been really booming. Obviously, India has been an enormous growth area, and also smaller markets like Israel. And part of what we're seeing in that is what's driving these hotspots flourishing. And I think, you know, in some markets it might be just a lack of traditional infrastructure. That means that many of the new technologies are hopping over existing technologies in order to offer new kinds of services. In some places it might just be a lack of trust in the established financial institutions. And in some markets, maybe like Israel or maybe in Estonia, we might hear from Ian in a minute, it might be because the government's had a really focused agenda on trying to build up a particular capability in FinTech. So in the case of Israel, it's done a lot of work on how to support FinTech for an aging population. And that's really led to it booming very strongly. So I think that's one of the things that we've seen. But Abdul, I know when we were talking a little bit earlier, you see a bit of a chronological element to all of this as well.
Yeah, so I more recently had the privilege of working across the Middle East with a number of jurisdictions. Prior to that, I was part of the founding team of Innovate Finance, so saw the FinTech boom here 10 years ago. And I think that timing is important. There's a number of factors that we look at when we assess an ecosystem and its conduciveness to FinTech. Predominantly, there's about 2 or 3 levers that any government can really deploy to help spur innovation, and specifically in FinTech. The one here that in the UK that I think was really the trigger was the FCA opening up competition with competition mandate and allowing FinTech firms to be regulated. That was a step change. They were the first regulator to do that, and that's really why UK FinTech took off all those many years ago. We already had a booming tech sector. We were a leading financial services center, so we didn't have any of those problems and any of those pillars to build up. And because of that, we had a talent base here already. So organically, just by pulling that one lever, you know, UK was able to really jump ahead. And since then, really, everyone's been playing catch up. So it's really about the risk appetite that those jurisdictions have in terms of allowing innovation in financial services. So what are really the incentives to do that? Over the last 10 years, due to the sort of global economy, over the years, more and more pressure has been put on existing sectors in other jurisdictions. And so what we've started to see is governments take innovation more seriously, adopt what's happening in Western markets, predominantly in the US and the UK, and seeing how that's fueling innovation, job growth, economic growth, and really figure out how best they can deploy that. And again, the trigger often tends to be looking at the regulatory framework and figuring out what bits of regulation they need to update to allow that innovation.
And are there any particular markets, Abdul, that you have your eye on where you think they've got the sort of criteria for sort of exponential growth?
So I think certainly my experience, most of my experience is in the Middle East. I think Dubai sort of stole a march on everybody with quite a few progressive announcements. Not a lot of those came to fruition straight away. I think Abu Dhabi as a more deliberate approach and definitely a better regulatory regime has really stolen a march on everyone in that region in terms of the quality of the regulatory framework they've put in place. Through Ellipses, we also venture build. We've established one of our companies in Abu Dhabi as well because of that regulatory framework that they have there for that market. I think now really in terms of consumer market size, Saudi is really the most interesting market. That is the one that everyone really wants to access. They're probably 3 to 4 years behind everyone else in the region in terms of their regulatory frameworks. But over the last few years, they've made certain strides. And we've seen things like BNPL really take off there. Some of the largest rounds for fintech firms in that region have been BNPL firms in Saudi Arabia. And there are other areas that are opening up. Dubai has become interesting again because of VARA and the Virtual Asset Regulatory Authority and what they're doing with digital assets, blockchain, crypto. And a lot of firms are now looking at Dubai as a place to register in that sector as well.
Thank you, Abdul. Nadia, could I bring you in? I know your business operates both in London and in Mumbai. India is obviously a country which is getting a lot of attention. What's your perspective on, particularly on India as a location and the growth of fintech there?
Yeah, thanks so much. India is an extraordinarily exciting market. We specialize in intermediating in the SME market for credit. And so you've got a situation where you have 63 million SMEs growing at a CAGR of 20% compounded every year, 10,000 financial institutions trying to service them, and a real need for intermediation. And I think one of the reasons that the market is booming so much is also because of the interventions government has taken to introduce things like unified payment interface, real digitization of a tech stack that can be availed of by many players in the market. And of course, you've got the confluence of that with the largest penetration of mobile phone usage in the world. So you can think you can have a lot of innovation. At the same time, things are still antiquated in many ways. So whilst there's the opportunity for digitization, things we're trying to do are improve innovation in terms of getting people results. So still you have about 90% of small business owners who approach a financial institution and won't get the loan because they don't know which is the right financial institution, how to prepare themselves. So working on digitizing those processes and facilitating access to education. Also a huge opportunity outside of the conventional just, deliver the financial transaction.
Thank you, Nadia. And Ian, it's sort of closer to home. Obviously, you're with FinanceEstonia, but I know you've got a lot of experience with bankish across Europe and across the Nordics. Like, what's your view? Do you think there's opportunities close to home, or do you think people should be looking further afield?
I don't think there's one right or wrong answer in terms of which hub is the best. I think all of the hubs exist for a reason, and essentially the focus of each of those hubs would have much of a different effect for different companies themselves as well. So when fintechs are choosing where to get regulated themselves, or even if it's not by the example of bankish, not a regulatable fintech from that perspective at all, then still there are some intrinsic considerations to make in terms of which market do I start out from, and particularly that's true for the regulatory element. But I don't believe it's necessarily good to just focus on the big hubs. As by the example of the Baltics, we have Estonia and Lithuania, which are very strong fintech hubs as of nowadays. And Estonia, naturally being the famously unicorn factory of the world, that's obviously per million capita, but still, considering the small size of the nation, we have been very digitally advanced, and slowly but surely it is getting more established into the fintech scene. That could not only be because of the regulation, but the underlying capability of doing business in Estonia and the access to digitally capable, data sources, for example, which you have brought up for India is very important, as well as access to talent, funding, etc. So these are the sort of key features that I would like to outline when thinking about all of those different hubs.
Thank you. And Brian, you're obviously in a lot of perhaps more developed markets, the UK and the US, but you were mentioning to me earlier, you look at sort of like a sort of collaboration or competition strategy. What's your take on how the world is developing? And we're seeing more companies from different markets. Do you think it's getting more complicated, or do you still see sort of collaboration? ruling
Thanks,
here?
David. No, and he made some really good points there as well, which kind of I can follow up on as well. I mean, and you know, my business is a regulated business. You know, we're e-money institution in the UK, e-money institution in Lithuania, covering the rest of Europe in a post-Brexit world, and we're part of a bigger group, which is the Bank and Circle Group. So our sister company is a B2B bank, you know, a huge B2B bank. So often we kind of align our strategies and can piggyback together going into different markets. The US being an example, the bank's applied for a full federal license. We're already present in the US kind of as a card issuer, so we're kind of aligning together there and kind of hopefully taking a chunk of that market. But, you know, if I look at when we acquired B4B Payments, which was just over 2 years ago, we've trebled, just to give you an example of opportunity in our core markets here, we've trebled our business in that time, and that's simply because the fintech space, even here in UK, as Abdul mentioned, leading market in fintech space and Europe as well, there's still tons and tons and tons of underserved and fintechs and opportunity really, and that's what we've been really kind of developing and nurturing, and the, you know, the results in our growth have shown that. Beyond UK, Europe and US, which are all kind of core markets, you know, we have, and I have personally got experience in exploring others. I mean, you know, I'm ex-Visa as well, I'm ex-Scheme, I've sat on wore different hats and sat on different sides of the fence. It's not easy, you know, with some of the points being touched on. Different markets have different regulatory frameworks. Some of them, you've got to be a bank, for example, to issue cards. Some of them do have an EMI equivalent. So it's not easy at all. Now, if I look at the Asia-Pac region, fantastic in terms of innovation, development, opportunity, but it's so fragmented. Businesses often make the mistake that, oh yeah, we can go into Singapore and we'll go out from there from Asia-Pac. It is not like that. Every market has got so different. You know, I'll give you a very brief example. In Singapore, they do have an e-money institution equivalent, MSP license, which enables you to become a principal member of Visa or MasterCard and issue cards and so on and so forth, but just in Singapore. Now, Singapore's got, 8 million population. It's already crammed with lots of major blue chip corporates trying to all going after the same piece of business. And you can't kind of passport out of there. Taiwan, for example, you have to be a bank to issue cards. So going back to your first point, in those markets where you've got opportunity outside of your core regions, collaboration is key. You know, in the nature of this market, as a lot of people in this room will know, is sometimes you'll compete with your neighbour. The other times you collaborate, and that's the key, is kind of getting that balance right in terms of getting the growth and doing the right commercial business. And you know, just businesses make the mistake, oh, we'll be going to this market, that, you know, we're taking over the world, it equates to success. Well, actually, it often equates to huge distraction, huge investment, and you don't necessarily get the result you want, i.e. getting the licenses that you need from a regulatory perspective to do businesses in their markets. And that's where, you know, I'm a huge advocate of collaboration. And our focus for the immediate term, from our perspective, is going to be our core markets, which is UK, Europe, US, while keeping an eye on closely what's happening around the world, and obviously working closely with our sister company, Bank and Circle, where we can collaborate together and hopefully get into some new exciting markets.
Thanks, Brian. Ian, I think you wanted to come in on that.
Yeah, very interesting to hear about Singapore on that end, but yeah, I wanted to point it out that it's perhaps also relevant closer to home, as in Europe we also have differences in the regulatory environments. And for example, myself as a credit professional, I have seen it time and time again, how in different regulatory environments you might even need to have a license to not only do consumer credit, but also B2B lending, and all of those different subcategories of licenses. Whereas in other markets, for example, in order to do even a payment plan to your business partner, as a regular business, not non-financial business, you should be regulated, which is insane on its own, right? So you have this spectrum of different regulatory sort of principles also within the European Union, so not quite as black and white.
You're absolutely right. I was actually going to mention that, but you're totally spot on. There are considerable nuances from a local regulatory standpoint, which make things challenging as it is in Europe. And like, for example, Germany and France, look at Germany, you're passporting into Germany as from Lithuania or any of the European, you know, you've got to adapt their hardest local kind of compliance regulation as opposed to the regulation from, you know, you think it should all be consistent, but it ain't. And it's kind of, you've got to be kind of on the ball, really.
And yeah, not to make this a dialogue, just between us as a final thought related to this whole thing, I think that there is a certain degree of charm even in a smaller environment, regulatory environment such as Estonia, for example, as all of the companies, either from the digital side from a few years back with all of the unicorns, nowadays also some first unicorns also in the fintech scene and the growing fintech scene that we have in Estonia today, we start out our businesses and start building our businesses immediately to be global, not for the local market. And I think that's a bit of a charm, starting out from a smaller environment as well, rather than to go, for example, as an Estonian entrepreneur, come to establish myself in the UK, establish the business over here, and then start thinking about the next one and the next one.
Okay. Do you want to come in?
Yeah,
Nadia?
just I think there's also an opportunity to kind of take the best and move it abroad. So we are headquartered in the UK, we operate in India. We applied GDPR to our business before there was really any discussion of that sort of a framework in India. And what that meant was that 2 years ago when the government started demanding localization of data, we were already localized in India, but a lot of the bigger companies like MasterCard and Visa hadn't thought forward about that and were sort of operating within the current regime. So it was a very big expenditure that they had to make in terms of an investment, then localize all the data that they had in India. And it led to the card issuers actually being suspended for a period of time. So if you can be forward, I mean, some of the things about being within the fintech sector, if you can sort of take the best in-class practices and apply those, then emerging markets governments are often looking at that as the gold standard and then applying elements of that. And so you're kind of ahead of the curve when you start operating there.
But do you think, Nadia, that you might get to a point where innovation starts to come out of these other markets? I'm going to show my age here, but I used to work in the telecom sector, and I remember the whole debate around, you know, I worked for a fixed line telecoms operator, and mobile came in, and everyone was like, this is going to be like this slow growth. And then suddenly it went whoosh, and you know, the whole market, global market changed with a whole bunch of new competitors coming in, and established players are actually struggling how to stay there. Like, do you, and I know Nicola, you obviously are looking at how to promote the UK, but do you sort of see that actually we're at the cusp of a change with these hotspots that you know, it might also bring in new products, new services, new competitors, new innovation, which actually might even come back to the UK as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the innovation that's happened in India in terms of, you know, cashless ATMs, things like this that people can access and transact without even having a bank account.
Right, yes.
These are things that I think we'll start to see moving into other markets to address populations that might be underserviced, for example. You know, you've got people assume that everybody in the UK is banked, but there are parts of the population that are not. There are parts of the youth population that are not, and those innovations, I think, will be very will find their way around the world to help address those pain points.
Nicola, what's your perspective?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, you know, one of the things that's very exciting about a lot of the fintechs that are emerging in different parts of the world is just how they've innovated to deal with the local situations that they're in. But much of that then applies back into other markets as well. So, you know, there's fantastic solutions that are coming out of Africa. I think it's one of the real places to watch in terms of where the new innovation and growth is going to come, because it's got such a young population. It's really catering for a whole generation of people coming through who have never seen a bank account and may never wish to see one. So they're not waiting for the solutions from you know, the West to come to them. They're actually just pioneering out in whole other ways. And I also think it may be changing the way in which we're seeing regulation starting to come through. So I was in Indonesia recently talking to the fintech groups there, and one of the things I thought was just so interesting is that it was actually the FinTech Association itself that was deciding who goes into the regulatory sandbox. So they were acting almost as an intermediary for the regulator to say, we can peer review this, this work as well. So these quite really disruptive ways of thinking about how do we engage between the fintechs, business, the regulators and government. I think some of that is really changing in some of these emerging markets and is quite interesting. So that's the good news. I think the opportunity for the UK and for other markets is, at the end of the day, you can innovate and you can grow in markets around the world, whether in Indonesia or India or Africa. But one of the hardest challenges is capital raising. And at the end of the day, places like the UK still have a much stronger appetite for supporting fintech than many of these markets do, where they're financial institutions and they have a very, very young VC community, and it's very hard for these companies to be able to grow to unicorns at home. So there is an opportunity, I think, for partnership in that area, and maybe something that we should be really looking at rather than seeing this as a competition. We should see it much more as a mesh or a network of opportunity that we should all be capitalizing on.
Abdul, do you see that the same way as an opportunity, or do you see there's some threat in this, like with the businesses that you're running?
I think the most interesting thing out of that discussion for me was that point around collaboration. And I think, outside of industry players, the role of organizations like Innovate Finance are really important. So if you look at what's happened over the last 10 years, for what Innovate Finance as an organization does, a lot of it in the early days we used to call pom-pom waving, which was, UK fintech is the best in the world, and we should really champion that. And it's now actually really serious, heavy-hitting regulatory and policy work with governments, Bank of England, Treasury, etc. I also sit on a digital asset association called Global Digital Finance, which works with 80 global regulators. We started that about 6 years ago during the digital asset boom, ICO boom, really to help those that were more credible in the space demonstrate to policymakers, regulators, that this industry is not just a boom and bust industry. There are some credible players here and some potential here. And over the years, we've been able to craft that message and really move the dialogue forward when you have policymakers and regulators talking different language about the same thing. So how do you regulate, for example, a stablecoin? Having very different approaches. And that's where I think industry has an opportunity to collaborate, is through organizations like this, where you come together and you actually deliver the same message with a stronger voice than the one individual. And those organizations can act as the sort of the neutral intermediary between industry and government. And the Tulip Sadiq said upstairs in her keynote that they're looking for industry to participate with them. And so the fact that they're engaging already with a view that they might be in government later this year with an organization like Innovate Finance is fantastic. And everyone who's involved with organizations like this should really leverage that opportunity to get across what they want from a regulatory and policy perspective that are hurdles right now.
No, I totally agree, Abdul, and to follow up what you've just said, what Nicola said about that, and the collaboration point that I mentioned is, you mentioned about the VC world. I think everybody knows that there's a lot less VC funds slushing around as there were, in the UK and Europe. And if the funds that are available, they want to see a profit, and they want to see a profit quickly. They're no longer throwing good money after bad, if you like, in order to build up a customer base, which is what we've seen historically. That kind of landscape is gone, and that's why collaboration really is the key. We've seen a real slowdown from a regulatory standpoint, in terms of getting licensed, across jurisdictions across all the world, particularly in UK and Europe. So, as Abdul mentioned, and Nicola, the collaboration with associations and people that have been there, have done it, that's probably the way forward in the short to mid-term in terms of developing a more global footprint, should we say, and leveraging some of the exciting innovation in other markets that Nadia's mentioned in India and Africa. So, yeah, collaboration is key.
So sorry, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I wanted to add just to that I think it's also a sign of the fintech sector all in general maturing quite a bit with the VC money viewpoint and collaboration becoming even more and more important. That's the same viewpoint that we've taken with FinanceEstonia, that it is key for us to also develop partnerships with other of those international organizations in order to be sharing experiences, sharing contacts with each other. And at the end of the day, innovation hasn't stopped because of that maturing. We can still see it happening, but the sector itself is definitely much more mature.
Nadia, in India, what's driving your growth? Like, is it a sort of regulatory framework? Is it capital there? Is it a consumer demand? Is it you've got talent to build a business, or is it everything?
I think it's kind of everything, in that there's a huge population. It's a huge young population. It's the economy that's most in growth in the world. So there's huge demand for credit and credit-associated products across the whole spectrum, from consumer credit through to business credit. The regulator was one of the most active regulators during COVID, which people liked and didn't like, but it definitely meant that the sector matured fairly quickly because there was so much focus on this. And then you've got digitization and extraordinary innovation, actually, by the government in terms of allowing people access to basic things like identity cards and things like this that facilitate the ability to then, underwrite and provide those financial services. So the whole kind of package is there in India. And then, of course, you've got other markets around where you can expand into, which are similar in dynamics, like Indonesia, Vietnam, the Southeast Asian markets, which operate not dissimilarly to India. So that's been, for us, it's been at the beginning when we entered the market, we were early and there wasn't that much, the digitization curve just was kind of going like this, and now it's become like a hockey stick. And so that's really driving our growth and driving demand for the services that we provide, including one we're just about to launch, which is a digital financial wellness program for SMEs to help them understand what their credit position is today and how to improve and then access affordable finance, which you can imagine is complicated in a market where you have an option to go to 10,000 banks and get a loan from them. Which one is the one that's going to be the right one for you? It's difficult to navigate that kind of an environment.
Thanks, Lo. We've got just over a minute left. Is there one to watch? So, is there one that you think, 5 years' time, this is where a lot of fintechs will have gone into? I know Ian's going to say Estonia, but we'll come back to you, Ian, in a second. Abdul.
I probably won't make a prediction and pick one, but I'll say that the interesting things to look out for are large consumer markets that are underserved. I think in the next 10 years, those are the ones that are really going to be interesting, and I think Nadia's mentioned a few of them, as well as some others around the world. And then I think it's the way emerging technology is really addressed. So, for example, AI. There's two risks with AI as I see them. One is it's underregulated, and I think that would be a mistake. I think that whoever gets the regulation right has a chance to really do well in the AI space. And then the other is potentially AI being seen as a national asset and closing off access to AI. I think that would be a mistake. So again, whoever manages those hurdles, I think would be quite interesting. Yeah.
Anyone else want to come in with their predictions?
I guess I'm just going to, be the slight dampener on things, because whilst I would love to say lots of those underserved consumer markets are going to be the place to look, I think with the wave of geopolitics that we've got coming through at the moment, we're going to see a lot more regional constellations forming. So I think your ability to service some markets will preclude you from servicing others. And you're going to have to sort of pick which kind of camps you want to go into. So I think there is an enormous lot of opportunity out there, but you're going to have to pick where you're going to align yourself, at least in the short to medium term, because I don't think it's going to be an open come one, come all.
Nicola, thank you very much, and some wise advice there. We're at time, so thank you very much, everyone, for listening. And if you could perhaps give a big round of applause to our wonderful panel.